when we live 1,000,000 years in that wonderful place, basking in the love of Jesus, beholding His face. It will seem but just a moment of praising His grace. That will be a glad reunion day. Glad day, a wonderful day. Glad day, a glorious day. There with all the holy angels and loved ones to stay. That will be a glad reunion day. Amen. Be a glad reunion day for sure. "210, near the cross." Brother Ray, we're going to sing this one, and we're going to let you come and sing for us. All right. Jesus, keep me near the cross, there a precious fountain, free to all a healing stream, flows from Calvary's mountain. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river. Near the cross a trembling soul, love and mercy found me. There the bright and morning star shed his beams around me. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river. Near the cross, O Lamb of God, bring its sins before me. Help me walk from day to day with its shadows o'er me. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river. Near the cross I'll watch and wait, hoping, trusting ever, till I reach the golden strand, just beyond the river. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river. Amen. All right. I'd like to introduce this guy to you. We've missed him, haven't we?
Seems like I've been going forever. My singing may show it tonight. It's grand lessons are saying, I need you more today.
Amen.
life's troubled roads, and you said, come unto me, and I'll bear your heavy load. I need you more today than I did yesterday. Mountains are higher, rivers are wider. I need you more today than I did yesterday. Help me remember, I need you more today. When I wake up in the morning and I fear to face the day, let me feel your gentle hands leading the way. Yesterday has come and gone, with those trials far behind, but I'm ever learning, Lord, and every day I find I need you more today than I did yesterday. Mountains are higher, rivers are wider. I need you more today than I did yesterday. Help me remember, I need you more today. Help me remember, I need you more today. Don't have to train forever again.
Great song.
Well, I'm glad to see Ray back. Always good to see him. I remember Polly in prayer. She's still working, so kind of unusual for her to have to work this late, but they have emergencies at that dental office, and when they do, she can't get away. So it seems like that's just part of that business. We're going to be on the sixth seal, and Revelation chapter 6, verses 12 through 17. And I don't know, I brought several of those sheets for last week. So if any of you guys that didn't get 2 sheets for last week, one on vengeance and one on the fifth seal, I've got some extra copies back there. So if you want them, I've got those. And I think everybody's got the one for tonight. So when we look at this, you know, you think about, I think on here I put fear as the topic on this one, and on last week's I actually had vengeance on there. It should be actually prayer for vengeance. When you think about, you know, what happened last week, remember what was going on was they had all these that were under the altar that were praying, and what they said was, you know, how long, O Lord, faithful and true. And they were calling for God instead of like what you and I are used to praying and hearing in prayer, you know, God forgive them or God have mercy on them. They were calling for God's wrath and vengeance to fall upon them. And so what we're going to see this week is actually an answer to that prayer, because that's what's going to happen. Now remember, that fifth seal is right in the very middle of the seven-year period. It's at the 3.5-year point. Sixth seal is just barely into that time. And you think, well, we only have one seal to go, and there's 3.5 years. But remember, in The seventh seal will have the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls, and the 7 vials. So there are a lot of things, and when they happen, they're going to happen real rapidly. So anyway, we've come from, the first 4 had, first 4 seals that we looked at had the riders with the human, the horses on the riders, and they had, each one of them was a human influence or being involved in it. In the 5th seal last week, remember we had those that were under the altar, so we had human. This time you don't see the human interaction, you see God acting. And I think it's as a result of the prayers that were in the last seal, the 5th seal of these, that God has stirred into action. And He's going to be, and actually I was supposed to have 2 of these sheets for tonight, but I took it easy on Polly since she was doing all the copying for me, and I just made one. But I was going to have one that completely, and it would have had all the scriptures with it that had the day of the Lord, and explain, what the day of the Lord is. And it appears 14 times in the Old Testament by that name directly, and many other references to it in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, you see it mentioned 4 times. And the day of the Lord, when you read about it and you go into it, it's a day of terrible fear. I think I wrote down a lot of the scriptures here. We'll look at some of them as we go through these, with the earthquake and the sun going black and the moon and all that. We're going to look at some of those things. But think about this. When this happens, there's going to be a great fear grip the whole world. Because when He opens this 6th seal, all these things that have happened, just think of what condition the world is in by this time. Because you've had the false peace, which, that's still going on in there. Have the wars, which are still being carried on in there. We had the pestilences and the famines, and, then this cry for vengeance. Just think of what, just from those first 3.5 years, what shape the world was in, and the people, in their condition and in their mental state. And at that time is, on that 5th seal is when Satan's going to empower, and we'll read about it in more detail in the rest of Revelation, this evil one, and he'll go into the temple of Jerusalem, break the covenant with the Jews that he made for 7 years. In that 3.5, he's going to do what Daniel calls the abomination that makes desolate. And he's going to call himself and set himself up as God. And he's going to have people worship and look to him as God. He's going to tell everybody he's God. Now, there are still many others. Remember, under that first seal, we talked about that false peace that are calling themselves the Messiah and calling themselves, the true God and the true Messiah, the Savior of the world and all this. But he's going to be by far the most preeminent, the most charismatic, the most influential of any of them. And he is actually going to be, at this time, is when God is going to take Satan out of the second heaven, take him and his minions, all these millions and millions of fallen angels, and cast them down to the earth. And like I said, we'll go into it in greater detail, but that's just kind of give you an idea and a vision. And you can imagine the fear that's going to grip these people when these things from this 6th seal happen. And people fear so many things. Fear is a good thing. It's given by God to help us through times. We're supposed to have fear when we're children. We're supposed to know not to touch fire, not to, go into deep water and to do certain things. Fear is good and it's healthy. But there is a lot of people that have what are called phobias. And what are the phobias? They're just fear on steroids. There are unnatural and unreasonable fears. They go beyond just the normal fears that you and I have, into something that doesn't really make sense. Now, I used to have a phobia years ago with mice. When I was a little kid, when I was 3 years old, I was at my grandmother's house. My great aunt was there, and all of a sudden she jumped up and she was screaming and yelling and kicking her leg, and had her leg, you know, had her hands around her leg, and I saw blood coming down her leg, and the next thing I know, I saw a mouse fall down there, and I thought that mouse had caused all that. And for, you know, until I was, you know, 11 or 12, I had a fear of mice. I mean, I'd go pick up snakes and play with all kinds of things, but if I saw a mouse, it scared me because I saw what it did to my hand. And it was unnatural. Eventually, I got over it. But people, even in the Bible, it talks about people having such a fear at this time that some of them are just going to expire because the fear will grip them so much they'll just quit breathing. They'll literally just stress themselves to death and just die from fear, just kill over, just literally from fear. But the thing, you know, that you and I forget, and I think churches don't even press it, it seems like they even try to soften it, is this deal I've got written down first, is in Luke chapter 12, verse 5, where Jesus himself talks about we should fear the one that has the authority to cast you into hell, not just the one that has the power to kill you, or, you know, even a magistrate back in those days, if a subject didn't please him, he could say, you know, have that person killed, take him out and kill him, or whatever. Jesus says, you know, you don't need to fear that person nearly as much as you need to fear God. A lot of people don't think about fearing God, and yet, you know, we talk about when people come in the presence of God, what happens to them immediately? What happened to John? He fell prostrate before God. What happened to Isaiah and Ezekiel and all these others? You know, it's not one of these things where God is a loving, doting grandfather, like a lot of churches try to characterize God. You know, he is a fearful and an awesome, just being in his holy and righteous presence in our unholy state would bring massive fear upon us. Just to see him in his all-powerful, all-holy state would bring fear upon us. But he says, you know, the one that we need to fear most of all these things that these people are going to fear and everything, some of them are natural, some of them are unnatural. But let's look at verse 12, and it says, and I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell into the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken with a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it's rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, the rich men, chief captains, the mighty men, every bondman and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. Listen to this, says, for the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? It says that the great day of his wrath, this is the day of the Lord. This is what they commonly call, you know, the day of the Lord. What you see in prophecy, what Jesus even called it was, you know, the day of the Lord. Back in verse 12, you know, it says, when he got to the sixth seal and he opened it, he says there was a great earthquake. And in, it's kind of an interesting word in the Greek. It's the Greek word seismos, which we get, you know, the seismograph and all these things, talking about measuring the intensity of an earthquake. Actually, the word in the Greek doesn't include earth. It just says a great shaking. There's not a comparable word in the English. That's one of the things where, from the Greek to the English, the translation is kind of hard to make. But this word means shaking, and it's not just the earth. Now, the earth is going to be shaken like never before. Remember, he said there are going to be earthquakes, but this is the great earthquake. So up until this time, during this first 3.5 years, even up to that middle point, there's going to be earthquakes across the earth. This is going to be a shaking not only of the earth, but of the whole universe. As God takes Satan in that second heaven and all these evil spirits and all these fallen angels and takes them and casts them down to earth, You know, we're going to see the results of that, and things are going to intensify. And remember last week we read that where it said that the restrainer was going to be taken out in 2 Thessalonians. If you remember that, in that lesson from last week, it's got that written down. So there's not going to be anything to restrain these evil spirits from going across the earth and just wreaking havoc on people and indwelling people. There's going to be, you know, the indwelling of unholy spirits in ungodly people. And they're going to be able to do just the most terrible and awful things. And the ones that are going to be blamed on it are going to be these Christians. They're going to say, the quicker we can get rid of these Christians, things will get better. That it's because of them that all of this is happening, and you know, it's displeasing. I don't know that this is going to be the story, but I'm just thinking Antichrist is going to say, you know, that these people are causing, just like you and I are causing in America, you know, a lack of growth and a lack of understanding and compassion and all this because we're Christians and we preach the Bible about, you know, things that are sin, we call them sin. If homosexuality is a sin, it's a sin. If adultery is a sin, it's a sin. If alcoholism or any of these other things, if it's a sin, it's a sin. There's no need to hash, you know, and try to make it look like it's something it's not. It's just ungodliness, and God says, I'm going to put up with it. And I can just see this Antichrist saying, you know, if you don't worship me and those that are saying that, you know, God is responsible for all this, and that this God that they worship, and not only Christians, these that will be saved, but also Jews are going to be the target of this great part of this. And you think about this, you know, if you go into Matthew 24, verse 21, it talks about the great tribulation, and it talks about it being as in the days of Noah. You remember what it was like in the days of Noah? One of the things it said that violence abounded so much, that was what was in the heart of men. To do evil, to do, you know, ungodly and unrighteous things, but also that violence was one thing that was prevalent in Noah's day. Noah preached for 120 years, and what happened? It's going to be the same way in this time period. Jesus came and he preached. Now these 144,000 and all these others are going to come and they're going to preach the gospel. And these people are not going to listen, but there are going to be some that will be saved. That's the good part. But I want you, as we get towards the end of this, to see how hardened the hearts of these that are with Antichrist, just how hard their hearts are. And it says in this great earthquake, it says, you know, that it's going to shake not only just the whole earth, but the whole universe, actually. And if you go in there, I'm not going to read all these verses, but in Matthew 24, Luke 21, you know, and Joel, let's turn to Joel real quick and just read that one. Probably would be better off if I read Luke, but in Joel chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, it says, Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the earth tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand. A day of darkness and of gloominess of clouds and of thick darkness, as the morning spreads upon the mountains. A great people and a strong, there hath not been ever the like, neither shall there be any more after it, even in the years of the generation. And then back down in verse 10 it says, The earth shall quake before them, the heavens shall tremble, the sun and the moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. And if you go into Isaiah, actually Isaiah 9, Isaiah 13, which I wrote that down in Isaiah chapter 34, all of them have similar deals. And then let's go over to Luke chapter 21, verses 25 and 26 in the New Testament. Luke parallels Matthew 24. In Luke 21, verses 25 and 26, it says, And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, and the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Can you imagine how terrifying and how horrible that'll be? You know, most of us, we're talking about the famine and the pestilences. Most of us have never experienced that. And that's going to shake a lot of people's confidence and a lot of people's world. When these wars break out, they're worldwide. You know, you can see things like, it kind of makes you wonder with North Korea and Iran and now Russia and China getting involved in all these things. You know, you say, are we getting that close? Is it that close? It could be. But, you know, you think of these wars be different than even World War II, because now they have ballistic missiles. They have these electric pulse deals. They have all these, the bombs that was dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima are like 1/1000th of what one of these bombs today are. They're not, it's just like, it's like a cherry bomb compared to one of these mother of all bombs hitting you. It's a huge difference. And you think about the devastation that happened back at that time. Then you think about all these things, the pestilences, all these diseases that's going to be going around. You think about people starving. You know, it says basically you'll have a bowl of cereal a day is about all you're going to have to eat. And that's for one family. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what your world would be like if you were going through all of that? And then to have this come on top of it, where you can say, well, at least, you know, the earth is stable under my feet. At least I can look up and I can still see the stars and the moon. I can still see the sun during the day. But what happens when those are taken away? Can you imagine what that'd be like? I can't imagine. It just beyond belief, because, you know, so much of our bearing, so much of our happiness, so much of, you know, just our lives are tied up in these things. These things being gone would just be completely unnatural, and we wouldn't even, it'd be hard to even function. But yet things are going to go on. Can you imagine, though, when it says this great earthquake, and then it says the sun will be as black as sackcloth. And again, you can go in back into those, but the sackcloth is a sign of mourning. And usually what they would do, they'd make a robe out of black goat's hair, which if you've ever seen it, it's almost iridescent. It's real dark, dark black, but they'd make these robes and completely cover themselves, so when they went to a funeral or in mourning, it wouldn't draw any attention to them, and they could wail and cry, and it wouldn't take attention away. It would be all the way down from the top of their head to the bottom of their feet. You know, it would cover them completely. He said, it's going to be so dark. The sun isn't going to give its light anymore. It's going to be pitch dark during the day. Now, for a couple hours when you have an eclipse, what was that eclipse, like 30 minutes, even in the peak of it or something like that? It was nothing. And I couldn't even tell it was that dark. It was just a little eerie around here. But, you know, they said back in May of 19th of 1790, there was a day that was completely dark, so much so that the chickens went back to roost, and all these things that were natural, you know, went back to like it was day, and nobody even knows what the reasoning for that was for. But that was only one day, and it so upset a lot of people that they thought that God was coming. They thought this was the end of the times. Of course, they didn't take into account all these other things having to happen. But it says, you know, that even the sun will go dark. It says the moon to blood. You imagine in all these wars, in this great earthquake, and just God taking and just shaking the earth like that. That all these seismic plates, all these faults, all these things that are there, it's going to be shaken like it's never been shaken before. Volcanoes are going to begin to erupt. Things are going to come out from underneath, from the crust of the earth, black pillars of smoke and fire. You know, I sound like my cousin's grandma now, but I mean, it's usually even worse than that. But, you know, And really it's a fearful and an unbelieving thing, but you can see it just be cover the whole earth with just black, deep, dark. Remember when, what was that mountain in St. Helens? Yeah. Remember when it exploded in that summer? I think it was like in June. It exploded in May, but by the time the clouds got here, that May or that June was like 10 or 15 degrees cooler than it was normally. Instead of being, I know in Texas, instead of being 125 or 130, you know, it was like normal weather. But, you know, that's what it's going to be like. It's just going to be an unnatural, uneasy feeling. They're going to look for answers. They're going to be thinking in their mind. And remember, what did they pray for? They said, how long, O Lord, faithful and true, are you not going to wreak your vengeance on these inhabitants of the earth, these ungodly people that caused all this devastation and caused us to lose our heads and are killing these people? This is an answer to that. Then it says, you know, that the stars in, it says, and the stars of heaven fell upon the earth, even as a fig tree cast her untimely figs when she is shaken with a mighty wind. You think about this word for stars is astres, and it is, it can mean any heavenly body. It can be a planet, it can be an asteroid, it can be a meteor, but you know, when you think about this pelting the earth, it's probably going to be asteroids and meteors. And you think, well, you know, if we get hit by a meteor, no big deal. They say that a meteor that would fall that would be the size of a pickup truck, if it landed in a certain area, would be as devastating as the bomb that landed in Hiroshima. That's the size of a pickup truck. Plus what it would do to the atmosphere as it pierced the atmosphere. One that would be the size of a mountain, 600 feet by 1,000 feet, say. If it were to hit the ocean, it would cause a tidal wave that would go 600 feet in the air. How far would that cover into the inland? So I'm thinking this isn't, you know, big thing. I think this is going to be good size asteroids and meteors, but probably not these huge. I mean, and in reading for this and studying for this, when I heard some of the things that would happen when I just touched on it just a little bit, but a deal the size of the mountain, they talk about all the side effects of that. If a meteor or would come in here that would be the size of a city, say 10 miles across, and hit, you wouldn't believe the devastation it talked about that it would do if it hit this earth. And you say, oh, that couldn't happen. Oh yeah, it can. The more they look out in space, they're not that far from us. And I'm going to say this and you're going to laugh, but there was one that just missed us not long ago by 750,000 miles. You say, that's a long way. But it's not that far. Not in space terms. Matter of fact, I forget if it would have been just a little bit more, it would have hit us directly. And the size of that thing would have caused devastation worse than this. It's out there, it's around us. They're finding more and more all the time that are out there. And plus all this space junk that's up there, you know, these satellites and these missiles and all these other things that are up there. But when it talks about casting its untimely fruit, you know, like the figs, you know, I've got an apple tree. When the apples are green, they don't fall. Wind can blow, whatever. Not very many fall. Now, if a great wind comes along, some of those green apples will fall. But what happens when they turn red? They start falling. Of course, you're supposed to go out and pick them. You know, I throw them in the trash can and we dump them. But, you know, you think about an untimely figure. In other words, it's saying it's unnatural in the way this is going to be. He said these things are going to fall. It's like if you saw a strong wind hit one of those trees and you begin to see those figs, that's the way it's going to come in a great multitude. It's not just going to be one over in Europe or one over in Asia or one in Africa. They're going to be all over the United States, all over all parts of the world. And it's going to be devastating. I mean, when you see what these people do and what they end up saying, and then it says, you know, the sky is going to be rolled up like a scroll. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 34. And if you get a chance, read that whole chapter, because it's full of this. And I'm going to cut it off and finish it when we get done here, because I want to bring up one thing. Isaiah chapter 34, verse 4, it says, "And all the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll. And all their hosts shall fall down as a leaf falleth off from the vine, and a falling fig from a fig tree." You know, again, we see this same imagery, but he says, everything that you and I take natural, everything that we would navigate by. Somebody says, "Oh, I never get lost because I've got a real bearing for where I am, and I've got a real good understanding of directions and everything." You won't be able to tell. There's no North Star. There's no, you know, way of being able to tell where you are. Think about all these satellites that are up there that we use for all these communications. A lot of those satellites are going to be torn down and aren't going to be there. They're going to fall also. When these big asteroids and everything hit that, they're going to come down. They're going to fall. So when you look up in the sky, it's not going to look at like what we are used to seeing. Why is that? That's because God is cleaning house in that second heaven. An interesting verse in 2 Peter, you know, a lot of times we mention this verse and we do it casually. We talk about, well, a day is as 1,000 years with the Lord, and 1,000 years is a day. We just kind of casually go over it. Read that in context and see what he's talking about. When he's talking about this day of the Lord, I think it's like the advent of Jesus Christ. There's his first advent and the second advent. In the day of the Lord, I think you're going to see, if you study it, that there's a first one, and then at the end of the 1,000 years, there's going to be another one. There's going to be this in the first part, and then at the end of the millennium, there'll be another one when God will come and he'll finish it all, the very finishing of it. But we're going to see this one in this time period. Why does he say 1,000 years? Why didn't he say a day is to God like 10,000 years, or 100,000, or 1,000,000 years, or 1,000,000,000 years? Because I think what he was trying to tell us is, if we had looked at that verse and understand it, is what he's saying is, there's going to be the day of the Lord, just like, you know, there's going to be Jesus' first coming, but there's going to be a day of the Lord, a day of vengeance and great terribleness. The 1,000 years millennium, there's 1,000 years. A day is as 1,000 years. Why did he say that? Because to God, it's just going to happen that quick. And I think 1,000 years is there for a reason, not just a random number that he picked out of the air. At the end of the 1,000 years, we're going to see the finishing of the day of the Lord when he comes back. And he says, enough. I'm finally going to do away completely and forever with Satan. And he will be judged and thrown into the lake of fire, and all those that followed him in that rebellion during the end of the millennium. Go read that. See what you think. See it in the context of what Peter's talking about, and just see if there's not more to that verse than what we thought in the past. I'm going to leave it there, and then what we're going to talk about next week, we'll finish this up, and we're going to talk about a little bit more about the day of the Lord, and then we're going to talk about what these people say, and you know, we're going to talk about all these islands and mountains and everything being cast down. But we're going to finish up this about the day of the Lord. So, I know we got all the prayer requests. Got Friday is football. You know, if we do that one for homecoming, I wonder if we can make a deal with the high school and say, if you lose that game, then you have to serve us on Thanksgiving. I give them incentive. Anyway, when you think about all these things, about the 23rd, I know on the 10th, this Sunday night, we've got that Joel Williams. He was interesting. I enjoyed him last time. And then the 23rd, to have the singing. So we've got a lot of things on the calendar, got a lot of things going on, but don't forget all these that are suffering, all that are in the hospital, those that have lost loved ones, Jim's nephew and that family, 38 years old. And I think I saw a picture of him with a small child. Grandchild. Okay.
Oh, younger picture.
Okay. Well, we need to certainly remember these families and not forget to pray for those that we are. And Tony, I know his surgery. I hadn't heard how that was coming, but I think he's about to get back on track. So let's have a time of prayer, and then we'll be dismissed. Heavenly Father, we just praise you and thank you, Lord, for this day. We thank you for your word. Lord, for your mercy and grace in this age and for your warning of the ones to come. Just pray that you'd be with us, ask for mercy and on these that are sick, Lord, for your comforting grace for these that are grieving and have lost loved ones, for these families, Lord, if they don't know you as Lord and Savior, that before this time comes, Father, that this day, this very day, the Father, they would turn to you and know you as Lord and Savior. Thank you for our pastor and his faithfulness to your word, and just pray, Lord, that you bless this church. Help us, Father, to have a revival within our hearts, within these walls, and throughout this city. For it's in Jesus' name we ask it. Amen.
Amen.